And there's something called the generation that will have escape velocity. Do you know what that is? Okay, I'll tell you what it is. So in the last 50 years, we've increased life expectancy 20 years. In the last 10 years, we've increased life expectancy by 5 years. So there will be a time where in the last year, we increased life expectancy by a year. At that moment, Homo sapiens have achieved escape velocity from death.
Well, not quite. So recently, some popular influencers and scientists have started promoting this idea of longevity escape velocity, which basically means that humans will become effectively immortal. And this is leading to some major cope and delusion about death, and some people are already starting cults based on this concept. So today we'll be looking over all of the facts, and we'll see if this is true or if it's complete nonsense. So when we look at the actual data for life expectancy, you can see that it is steadily increasing, but it's nowhere close to the numbers that Neil Tyson was saying. So it's actually closer to around 10 years in 50 years and 0 years within the last 10 years. But when it comes to making humans immortal, increasing life expectancy is not going to be good enough. So life expectancy is just the average length of a life, whereas the max lifespan is the max amount of time that a human can be alive for. And max lifespan is what really needs to increase if we want this longevity escape velocity to actually work. So we can assess the change in max lifespan based on the record of the oldest living people. And if we look at the oldest living man over the last 25 years, it's only gone through one tiny increase of around 6 months to a year. And when we look at the oldest verified woman, this has increased slightly over time, but in the last 25 years, it hasn't increased at all. Now, the disparity between these two metrics actually makes a lot of sense because all the medical progress we made has been in curing and treating diseases, which increases the average life expectancy, but we haven't done anything to actually solve the fundamental problem of aging, which is causing all of these underlying age-related diseases. So through evolution, our bodies end up being designed to only live for a certain period of time before they need to reproduce through sexual reproduction. And this plays itself out in stem cells, which become exhausted, and in our DNA that just gets slowly damaged over time, and our telomeres are shortened. But this causes tons of other symptoms that we see in the elderly. We also have the fact that parts of our bodies are just simply unable to regenerate. So there are neurons within the brain that are not able to replicate, and they will never be regenerated, and they will eventually die. And it's the same thing with heart muscle that also stops growing at 10 years old. Bones and skeletal muscles also regenerate very slowly, and especially as you grow older. And when we look at the leading causes of death, which are usually age-related, most of these have to do with these cells that are unable to regenerate, such as the heart and the muscles and bones and the brain. The other leading cause of death is cancer, which has to do with mutations in DNA that also become much more likely as we age. So within the cells that can regenerate, every time they go through a cell division, the telomeres becomes slightly smaller and smaller over time. And what causes telomeres to grow is something called telomerase, but if you just introduce this into an old person's system, it will cause cancer. So the only way to restore telomeres and solve all the other problems of aging is through the miracle of life, starting from a rapidly expanding clump of cells full of telomerase and growing into babies. And it's important that the parents be younger in age so that the genetic, mitochondrial, and epigenetic information can be passed along and restored through conception before it is destroyed forever. So sexual reproduction is really the only true and natural way of solving the aging problem, but we have made some recent scientific advances that potentially will allow us to help treat the symptoms of aging. And probably the most promising discovery in this category is called Yamanaka factors. So these are epigenetic factors that, when modified, can cause cells to change from their current state back into stem cells. Scientists have also worked on partially reprogramming the Yamanaka factors, which has been shown to fix some aging symptoms within mice. So in this study from 2016, they took these mice with progeria and they were able to increase their lifespan by up to 33% through this Yamanaka factor treatment. Except it's important to note that progeria is a very rare condition in both humans and mice that causes accelerated cellular aging, and so the effects are going to be much less pronounced on wild mice species. So this study from 2023 did a modified cyclical gene therapy using the Yamanaka factors, and they were able to slightly extend the lifespan of wild mice. And you can see they increased the remaining lifespan at the time they gave them the treatment by 109%, which sounds like a lot. But when you consider that they did this at 124 weeks, which is the equivalent of a 77-year-old human, it's not as impressive. And in fact, it only increases their overall lifespan by 7.2% on average. So this is really the most promising treatment within longevity science, and this still only increased the lifespan by 7%. Okay, they also don't talk about if the max lifespan was increased. So in other words, this could just be treating symptoms of aging and not treating the aging itself. Now, there's a whole range of drugs and treatments in this field, and most of them will slightly increase the lifespan, at least on average, for these mice. However, they haven't shown any consistent and significant increase in the maximum lifespan of mice. Okay, so they can slightly increase the average lifespan by treating diseases and symptoms through these methods, but they've never been able to create a mouse that has the same lifespan as a dog or a cat or a human. Okay, and this is what would be needed to actually apply this to humans to make them effectively immortal. Okay, but this just simply does not exist with our current understanding of biology. This also explains the leveling off of the increase in life expectancy that we see, because as we improve medical treatment, this will cure more diseases and more humans will live past 100, but it doesn't necessarily mean that more humans will live past 120. And here I fit a sigmoid function to that life expectancy data, which will eventually cap out at somewhere near the max lifespan as we move forward in time. If you try to fit an exponential to the data instead, like the longevity experts like to suggest, you just won't find an accelerating upward slope. An escape velocity means life expectancy needs to increase by more than 1 per year, so it would need to be greater than the slope I am showing on the screen now. And this would simply be ignoring any past trends of medical progress and the fact that it becomes harder to extend remaining lifespan as the patients get older and older. The past predictions from these proponents of longevity escape velocity have been completely off the mark, but some still predict we will see escape velocity within the next 10 years. And this is just ignoring basic math and the basic history of longevity. So despite the complete lack of evidence, the longevity community really continues to propagate this idea to basically avoid coping with their own mortality. First, let's talk about the influencer Bryan Johnson. So he is a billionaire who wants to spend his money on trying to live forever, and his website says he has the best biomarkers of anyone in the world and is the healthiest person on the planet. Meanwhile, he wears veneers because of tooth decay. He claims his body temperature is only 93 degrees. He tracks his nighttime boners, but then reveals he was taking Cialis the entire time. He takes thyroid medication and other hormones like testosterone, and he even injected Botox directly into his penis. Here is his faulty logic if you want to read it for yourself, but his health plan has shown zero evidence of extending the max human lifespan, which would be necessary for immortality. And most of it is just a standard regimen of supplements and a good diet and exercise and getting good sleep and a lot of things like this, which are good in and of themselves, but the idea that they'll allow you to live forever is just plainly wrong. Okay, so now I'll play a clip from an interview that he did, which will really give you a glimpse into his mind and his mindset about longevity.
So when you say, I can defeat death, aren't you saying I'm God?
I'm saying that the universe speaks in irony.
That's for sure.
And that the story we've told is that God created us, and the actual story may be that we are going to create God.
What kind of God?
This is the question we face as a species. I mean, right now we have organized society around capitalism. We strive to make money, have power and wealth. We engage in warfare. You know, everyone's angling for their best interest. And I'm suggesting that this is not about me trying to live forever. This is me trying to answer the most pressing question in existence. What do we do as a species? Now, when death is inevitable, you're going to have an answer like, well, I'm going to live fast and die young, or I'm going to conquer territories and be immortal for my quest, or I'm going to make up your meaning of life game. But if death is not inevitable, we can extend our lifespans to some unknown horizon, the meaning-making games we have as a species all change.
Okay, so we've already talked about why this is scientifically incorrect, but it also poses the question of whether this is also morally wrong and just bad for society. Okay, so what he's describing is basically a society where we dedicate tons of our resources into making old people live, say, infinitely long or just very, very long. And what this means is we're going to take more and more of our resources that we use for, say, things like childcare to try to produce more new life in babies, and we're just going to be applying it to making these unproductive old people live as long as possible. So as the proportion of old people starts to increase because they're all living forever, eventually you get to a point where you have almost no people under the age of 30 or 40 that could actually produce more children, and you'd end up with like the vast majority of your society being these super, super old individuals. And if you eventually got to the point where there's almost no young people and almost no children, then when all those old people eventually die off because they couldn't live literally forever, then you just have nobody left. And it would be like this Tower of Babel situation where we just end up in a total disaster by not acting like mortals and trying to play God, if you will. So just to sum it up, there's two options really. You can apply all of our resources to making people live as long as possible just because they're afraid of death, basically, or we can apply our resources to creating new life, creating new people, and doing everything else like exploring the galaxy and advancing science. Okay, so I'll let you judge the morality for yourself. And next, let's talk about the other major proponent for longevity escape velocity, which is Ray Kurzweil. So he's a very famous scientist, and I'll just let you hear from him for yourself. But just keep in mind that he's a very prominent atheist, and he's also 77 years old.
Do you think about your own mortality? Are you afraid of it?
Yes, but I keep going back to my idea of being able to expand human life quickly enough in advance of our getting there. Longevity escape velocity. Which we're not quite at yet, but I think we're actually pretty close, particularly with, for example, doing simulated biology. I think we can probably get there within, say, by the end of this decade, and that's my goal.
Do you hope to achieve the longevity escape velocity? Do you hope to achieve immortality?
Well, immortality is hard to say. I can't really come on your program saying, I've done it. I've achieved immortality.
Right.
Because it's never forever.
A long time of living well.
But we'd like to actually advance human life expectancy, advance my life expectancy more than a year every year. And I think we can get there by the end of this decade.
Is there a case, this is a difficult question, but is there a case to be made against living forever, that a finite life, that mortality is a feature, not a bug, that living a shorter, so dying makes ice cream taste delicious, makes life intensely beautiful, more than it
Most
otherwise
people
might be.
believe that way, except if you present a death of anybody they care about or love, they find that extremely depressing. And I know people who feel that way 20, 30, 40 years later. They still want them back. So, I mean, death is not something to celebrate, but we've lived in a world where people just accept this. Well, life is short. You see it all the time on TV. Oh, life's short. You have to take advantage of it. And nobody accepts the fact that you could actually go beyond normal lifetimes. But anytime we talk about death or a death of a person, even one death is a terrible tragedy. If you have somebody that lives to 100 years old, we still love them in return. And there's no limitation to that. In fact, these kinds of trends are going to provide greater and greater opportunity for everybody, even if we have more people.
So I think that was a really revealing video. And it's really interesting to me how he's just clinging on to this idea and basically not accepting death. even as he's almost 80 years old. And I think this is almost like a religious belief for him at this point, because he's a pretty well-known atheist, and this is sort of like heaven for him, because normally a lot of religious people can accept death as in they're going to keep on living in some form through their soul. But for him, maybe this is just an illogical belief that he gets to live forever, which it's very clearly not true, especially as he approaches his old age. He also makes this point that it's still a tragedy, or it's still sad when someone that's 100 years old dies. And I would just say, for most people, this is just completely not true. So if you've ever been to an old person's funeral, it's usually more of a celebration of their life, and people sort of understand that it was their time to go. However, if you go to a young person's funeral, especially for a child or a teenager, it's usually really devastating, and everyone is really mourning because of all the lost potential that person has. So for a very elderly man who dies, if he's already been able to create new life through his children and grandchildren, he's already sort of living on in a way. And if he's achieved most of the goals of his life and contributed to humanity, then it's really not a tragedy at all. And in that case, the death itself can actually be really beautiful. So when it comes to this whole longevity escape velocity concept, I think it's important to just be reasonable about this and stick with the science, which is telling us that it's just not possible to, say, double or even more the max lifespan of humanity. So it's not possible for people to live forever. Okay, it's just not going to happen. And then philosophically, I think it's important for us to sort of accept our own mortality and cope with our own death. And this can basically allow us to find basically a deeper meaning to life beyond our own egos and clinging to our own, little finite human experiences. So I hope you liked the video today. Make sure to let me know what you think about this topic in the comment section below, and make sure to like and subscribe to my channel and check out all my other content. And with that being said, have a great day.